Every global reserve currency dies. None escape the math. For centuries, the pattern has been the same. Different empires, different flags, different promises, but the ending never changes. After about 80 to 100 years, the system breaks, not because of enemies, not because of accidents, but because debt quietly replaces discipline. Here's the uncomfortable paradox. The US dollar still dominates global trade, yet it has reached the exact age when every reserve currency before it began to fail. Not hypothetically, not eventually, now. And this matters to you more than you've been told. When a reserve currency enters decline, the damage doesn't start with a crash. It starts with purchasing power leaking away, with savings shrinking in real terms, with prices adjusting faster than wages, while officials insist everything is under control. The dollar became the world's reserve in 1944. Today, it's over 80 years old. Historically, that's not stability. That's the danger zone. But here's the part most people miss. Systems don't collapse when fear takes over. They collapse when confidence lasts too long. And once that illusion breaks, the shift isn't gradual. It's sudden. What's happening now didn't begin with a single decision or a sudden shock. It's the result of a structure that's been bending for decades. On the surface, the core event looks manageable. The United States is running persistent trade deficits, expanding debt, and relying on monetary expansion to keep the system moving. Each element is explained away as necessary, strategic, temporary, but taken together, they form a pattern that only appears at a very specific stage of a reserve currency's life. Here's the wider frame. To function as the world's reserve, a country must export its currency faster than it imports value. That means borrowing replaces earning, consumption replaces production. Over time, the economy shifts from making things to financing them. For years, this felt painless. Cheap imports, strong markets, rising asset prices. But the trade-off was always there, accumulating quietly in the background. Notice what this reframes. The question isn't whether deficits are high, it's whether the system can survive only by expanding them. Because if constant imbalance is the requirement, then stability itself becomes conditional. And once stability depends on expansion, the next phase is no longer optional. Here's the claim that might make you rethink everything you've been told. The dollar isn't just the world's currency, it's a product of desperation. For decades, the United States has relied on one core principle: create more money to keep the global system moving. The government prints dollars, and the world takes them. Simple. The math seems to work as long as the system is fed. But behind the convenience of more dollars is a fatal flaw. It's all borrowed time. The justification? Stability, growth. But what's never said out loud is the cost. The more dollars are printed, the more the system relies on debt, not just within the US, but across the globe. And that's the key. The world has been paying for this free lunch in the form of inflation. Notice the contradiction. While the US prints money to fill gaps, it can't produce enough value to match. The world is left holding the bill without receiving corresponding value in return. This is the real meaning behind global liquidity. It's not a miracle of economics. It's a temporary solution to a long-term problem. And that's why once confidence shifts, there's no way back. This is the dangerous part. The dollar's dominance doesn't come from its inherent strength. It comes from leverage, and that leverage is eroding slowly but surely. Now watch as the contradictions start to catch up with the system. Here's where things start escalating. At first, the system seems to be functioning normally, but as the debt mounts and the money keeps flowing, the underlying structure begins to strain. Interest rates rise, debt servicing eats up more of the budget, and yet the US keeps printing, not to stimulate growth, but to avoid collapse. This isn't a short-term problem. It's a structural shift. Every crisis, every global shock is now met with one simple response: more liquidity, more borrowing, more paper promises, and each intervention compounds the next. The system isn't adjusting. it's circling the drain. This is a dangerous normalization. What once seemed unthinkable, like printing money to stabilize markets or borrowing endlessly to fund operations, is now routine. No longer are these moves controversial. They've become the necessary tool to keep the game going. This is how the system normalizes its own decline, not with dramatic crashes, but with quiet, persistent compromises. Policies that would have sparked panic a generation ago are now presented as inevitable. This is the new normal. And once the system reaches a point where it needs constant intervention to survive, it loses the ability to correct itself. There's no natural mechanism left to stop the spiral. Now, here's the real question. What happens when the next intervention no longer works? Now, let's look at the evidence that changes the way you see everything. It's not just the numbers that matter, it's the actions behind them. Publicly, you're told everything is under control, but look at what's really happening. The US has been borrowing more, printing more, and accumulating more debt than ever before. And the truth is, that doesn't add up. The real kicker is that all of this borrowing is no longer sustainable without external help. The US can no longer rely on foreign buyers to sustain its debt. It's now at the point where the system must keep printing money just to pay off its own obligations. And here's where it gets really revealing. There's no plan to fix this. No exit strategy, no plan for debt reduction. Instead, every new solution just deepens the problem. Each intervention is designed to buy time, not fix the issue. And the longer this goes on, the more apparent it becomes that the US is trapped in a cycle it can't escape from. Notice the real contradiction here. Leaders claim the system is stable, yet their actions tell a different story. The truth is buried beneath a fog of financial jargon and political rhetoric. The deeper the hole gets, the harder it is to admit there's no way out. And once people realize this, the next question isn't whether the system can hold, it's how long it can hold before the inevitable collapse. Now the pressure stops building quietly and starts stacking. Multiple stress points are moving at the same time. Debt keeps expanding even when there's no crisis to justify it. Interest costs rise, turning what used to be a background issue into a primary constraint. Every attempt to slow inflation makes the debt harder to service. Every attempt to ease pressure weakens purchasing power. Policy starts fighting itself. At the same time, external support thins out. Foreign participation becomes cautious, commitments shorten, risk tolerance drops. None of this looks dramatic on its own, but together it compresses time. Decisions that once had years of runway now have weeks. This is what loss of control looks like in real systems. There's no single lever left that fixes everything. Every move solves one problem by intensifying another. The margin for error disappears. Notice how quickly responses accelerate. Tools that were once reserved for emergencies are now deployed as maintenance. Speed replaces deliberation. Reaction replaces planning. And once a system reaches this stage, the question stops being who's in charge. It becomes whether anyone is. Now, let's shift the focus to what this means for you and for everyone. The changes aren't abstract. They show up in your daily life. Slowly at first, prices rise, wages stagnate, your savings don't go as far. What you once paid for a few months ago now costs more. It's not a surprise, it's not a crash. It's the system adjusting to a reality where stability is no longer guaranteed. What this looks like on the ground is simple. People adapt. They stop buying as freely. They wait for prices to stabilize. They invest differently. They're taking on more risk because it feels like the only option. It's not about wealth building anymore. It's about survival. The more they wait, the more they lose. This isn't about a political party or an economic theory. It's about ordinary people responding to a reality that's changing beneath them. And what's most unsettling is that this shift isn't happening because people want it to. It's happening because the system is forcing them to. The result is the same. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the middle class faces a constant struggle to maintain what they've worked for. And all of this happens quietly as the system moves towards its own inevitable end. If this feels familiar, say so in the comments, because if you've felt the squeeze, you're not alone. Here's the unsettling truth behind what's happening. The system doesn't fail by accident. It's engineered to keep going as long as it can by leveraging participation, by pushing risk further out into the future, and by removing consequences as long as possible. What allows this to keep going is the simple fact that people don't want to be the first to move. The system survives because everyone is locked into the same game. Everyone's currency, everyone's savings, everyone's investments are tied to the same currency. With that kind of dependency, moving away feels like jumping off a moving train. No one wants to be the first because the cost of being early is often too high. The system isn't just financially leveraged, it's psychologically leveraged. People buy into the idea that stability is a given, not a choice. And those who control the system are rewarded for keeping this illusion alive. Short-term calm is more valuable than long-term stability. No one talks about solutions, they talk about managing risk, because managing risk buys time, and time is all the system needs. Here's the most unsettling part: the ones with the most power are the ones most invested in making sure nothing changes. The rest of us are left hoping the system will hold long enough for us to get through. But systems don't hold forever. They break when they no longer have the ability to self-correct. And once the machine can't correct itself, the shift becomes inevitable. From here, the future is split into two potential paths, neither of them clean. One path is what's called managed decline. The system staggers forward, slowly eroding, markets remain volatile, debt keeps growing, but the crisis never fully arrives. Each crisis gets met with more liquidity, more borrowing, more interventions. People adapt, life gets more expensive, but it never feels like an absolute collapse. The system survives, but it's no longer functioning as it was designed to. The other path is more abrupt. At some point, confidence cracks, and the system starts moving faster than anyone can react. Markets pull back, foreign investors stop buying debt, the real cost of printing money becomes undeniable. The dollar weakens, inflation spirals, what seemed like temporary measures become permanent features, and before long the system is forced to reprice itself. Here's what ties these two paths together. Momentum. It's not about a single event that causes the crash. It's about a series of decisions, one after another, that push the system past its breaking point. And once momentum starts, there's no easy way to stop it. Both scenarios share one thing: a loss of control. Decisions that were once made with years of foresight now come with months, then weeks, then days of warning. The system will either gradually erode or it will snap. But in both cases, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The next move isn't hypothetical anymore. It's already forming. Here's the one deep truth that connects everything. When a currency is no longer supported by production value or trust, it begins to cannibalize itself. What seemed like a strong, stable system is nothing more than an illusion built on leverage and borrowed time. The system isn't falling apart because of a single event. It's collapsing because the mechanisms that allowed it to thrive are no longer functioning. The dollar, once the symbol of American power, is now a reflection of everything that's gone wrong in the system. It's not a sudden crash we're witnessing, it's a slow, painful decline. The question isn't whether it will collapse, it's when and how and what comes after. And here's the most important part. Once a system depends on constant growth and expansion, it cannot survive without it. The moment expansion becomes the only tool for survival, it begins to break slowly, quietly, and when it finally cracks, it won't be a sudden disaster. It will be a long, drawn-out collapse that affects everyone, the rich, the middle class, and the poor. This is why it's crucial to understand what's happening now, because when it becomes impossible to ignore, it's already too late. For those who want to stay ahead of this, follow for more in-depth analysis. The story isn't over. It's just getting started.